The crystal chandeliers caught the late afternoon sun and scattered it across the marble floors of the Ashford estate like broken stars. Elena Kovač moved through the grand ballroom with the kind of silence that came from years of making herself invisible. Her black serving uniform was pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it made her temples ache, and in her hands she balanced a silver tray laden with champagne flutes that cost more than her monthly rent. The party had been building for hours. What started as an elegant afternoon gathering had dissolved into something looser, louder, as the alcohol flowed and inhibitions evaporated among the guests of Marcus Ashford, real estate magnate and self-proclaimed patron of the arts. Elena had worked dozens of these events over the past 3 years, ever since she'd taken the job at Premier Service Catering, and she knew the rhythm well. The early hours were all performance, guests pretending interest in the art collection, in philanthropic endeavors, in each other's manufactured opinions. But by the time the sun began its descent, the masks started to slip. She moved between clusters of designer dresses and tailored suits, refilling glasses, clearing abandoned hors d'oeuvres from marble pedestals, her presence acknowledged only by the occasional imperious gesture toward an empty glass. The ballroom itself was a monument to excess. 30-foot ceilings adorned with Renaissance-style frescoes, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens that rolled down to a private lake, and everywhere evidence of Marcus Ashford's wealth. A Steinway grand piano sat in the corner, its black lacquer surface reflecting the room like dark water. Oil paintings in gilt frames lined the walls, though Elena suspected most of the guests couldn't name the artists if pressed. "More champagne," a woman's voice cut through Elena's thoughts. She turned to find Victoria Ashford, Marcus's wife, extending an empty glass without looking at her. Victoria was 53, but spent enough on preservation to pass for 40. Her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, her navy dress clearly custom-made. She stood in a circle with 3 other women, all of them radiating the particular confidence that came from never having worried about money. Elena refilled the glass smoothly, murmuring, "Of course, ma'am. I was just telling Caroline about the gala next month, the Children's Hospital benefit. We're expecting the governor." Elena moved away, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble. She'd learned early in this job that the wealthy spoke freely around service staff, as if waiters and caterers were simply moving furniture, incapable of judgment or memory. She'd heard confessions of affairs, business deals that skirted legality, casual cruelties delivered with champagne-loosened tongues. She collected these moments like others collected coins, not with any purpose, but simply because they were there. Near the piano, she spotted James Chen, the other server working this event. He was 22, putting himself through community college, and possessed an optimism that Elena found both admirable and exhausting. He caught her eye and made a subtle gesture toward the kitchen, their code for needing to swap out empty trays for full ones. The kitchen was a controlled chaos of heat and precision. Chef André ruled over his domain with the intensity of a general, barking orders in French-accented English while his team assembled canapés that looked more like tiny sculptures than food. Elena had learned not to linger here. She swapped her empty tray for one laden with smoked salmon on crisp rounds of toast, each topped with a precise dollop of crème fraîche and a single caper. "Table 7 needs attention," Chef André called out without looking at her. "The redhead keeps sending back the tuna tartare, says it's too spicy." Elena nodded, although she knew the tuna tartare contained exactly 3 ingredients beyond the fish itself, none of them remotely spicy. Some guests simply enjoyed the power of sending things back. When she returned to the ballroom, the energy had shifted again. Someone had turned on music, not the classical quartet that had played during the early afternoon, but something contemporary with a driving beat. A space had cleared near the windows, and several guests had begun dancing, their movements loose and uncoordinated, fueled more by alcohol than rhythm. Elena stationed herself near a pillar, tray balanced, waiting to be needed. She watched the dancers with the trained blankness she'd perfected,
but inside something twisted. She'd grown up with music, had spent her childhood and adolescence in rooms where every movement mattered, where the body became an instrument of precision and grace. These people moved like they'd never been taught that movement could mean something. "Oh God, look at Trevor," one of the women near Elena laughed, gesturing toward a man in his 40s attempting what might have been meant as a spin. "He dances like a wounded giraffe."
The group around her erupted in laughter. Trevor himself seemed unbothered, too drunk or too confident to care. Elena's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the tray's edge. "At least he's trying," another man said, loosening his tie. "Not like some people who are too uptight to even move." "Speaking of dancing," Victoria Ashford's voice rose above the others, "did anyone see that performance at the Riverside Theater last week? The contemporary piece. Absolute garbage. I don't understand why people call that dance. It looked like people having seizures." More laughter. Elena felt the familiar weight settling in her chest, the one that came from hearing her entire world dismissed as nothing by people who'd never attempted to understand it. "Real dancing is dying," an older man pronounced, as if delivering wisdom from on high. "Everything now is just," he waved his hand dismissively, "gyrating." Elena moved away before her face could betray her. She circulated through the room, refilling glasses, removing empties, being invisible. But the conversation about dance had spread, the way topics did at parties like these, becoming a game of who could be the most dismissive, the most cutting in their critique. She was near the kitchen door when she heard James's voice, tight with poorly concealed frustration. "Excuse me, I need to—" "Wait!" a woman's voice commanded. Elena turned to see a guest, younger than most of the others, maybe 30, with sharp features and sharper eyes, blocking James's path. "You've been darting around all afternoon. Do you dance?" James looked confused. What?" "Dance. Do you dance?" The woman's smile had an edge to it. "You move very deliberately, like you're performing." "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." "Oh, don't be modest." She raised her voice, drawing attention. "Marcus, I think your staff might be dancers." Elena felt the room's attention shift, predatory and playful. Marcus Ashford materialized from a group near the bar, his face flushed with expensive scotch. He was a large man, not fat but substantial, with silver hair and the kind of perpetual tan that came from ski trips and Caribbean vacations. "What's this?" he boomed, good-natured but commanding. "I think your staff might be dancers," the woman said, still smiling that knife-edge smile. "This one moves like he's on stage." "Is that right?" Marcus looked James up and down. "Well, we're all friends here. Show us what you've got." James saw his face go pale. "Sir, I really can't—" "Come on," someone else called out. "Don't be shy." The crowd was circling now, drinks in hand, eyes bright with the particular entertainment of watching someone squirm. Elena recognized the dynamic instantly, the wealthy at play and service staff as their toys. "I don't really dance," James managed. "I should get back to work." "Nonsense!" Victoria joined her husband, her voice carrying that false warmth that meant she was about to be cruel. "Everyone can dance. We've all been dancing. You're not better than us, are you?" The trap was sprung. Refuse and be accused of thinking himself superior. Comply and become the evening's entertainment, the monkey dancing for the organ grinder. James set down his tray with trembling hands. Elena wanted to intervene but didn't know how, didn't know what she could possibly say that wouldn't make it worse. The music was still playing, something with a heavy bass line, and the crowd of guests had grown wider, more eager. James began to move, and Elena's heart broke for him. He had no training, no sense of rhythm or space. He shuffled awkwardly, attempting something between a sway and a step, his face burning with humiliation.
The guests laughed, some trying to hide it behind hands or glasses, others openly guffawing. "Oh, that's terrible!" someone called out, delighted. "Make it stop!" another added, laughing so hard they had to lean on a companion. James stopped, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He was young enough that public humiliation still stung like a fresh wound before years had built up the calluses of people like Elena wore. He grabbed his tray and fled toward the kitchen, the laughter following him like a pack of dogs. The crowd turned back to their drinks, already forgetting, moving on to the next moment of entertainment. But Elena stood frozen, the tray in her hands suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She watched these people, these careless, cruel people, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger exactly. Anger would have been hot, impulsive. This was colder, more deliberate.
She thought of James in the kitchen, probably considering quitting, wondering if he could afford to quit. She thought of every moment over the past 3 years when she'd swallowed her pride, her identity, herself, to be invisible for people like these. She thought of the conversation about dance, about how real dancing was dying, about performances being garbage. And she thought about the worn point shoes hidden in her locker at the catering company, kept not for any practical reason, but because she couldn't bear to throw them away. Thought about the studio apartment where she practiced in the tiny space between her bed and the kitchenette, using the back of her desk chair as a bar. Thought about the acceptance letter she'd received 11 years ago from the American Ballet Theater, the one that had been rendered meaningless by her mother's cancer diagnosis and the mountain of medical bills that followed. Elena set down her tray on the nearest table. Her hands were steady, eerily calm. She walked to the center of the ballroom floor, to the space where James had just been humiliated, where the wealthy still danced their artless, clumsy dances. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in a way that came from years of projection training. "May I try?" The room didn't quiet immediately. It took a moment for people to register that the waitress was speaking, was standing in the middle of their party as if she belonged there. Victoria Ashford turned first, her expression cycling through confusion to annoyance. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone suggesting Elena had committed some breach of protocol. "Get back to work." "I'd like to dance," Elena said simply. She met Victoria's eyes directly, something she'd never done before. "You said anyone can dance. I'd like to try." Marcus Ashford laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. "Well, well, the waitress wants to show us up, does she?" He seemed more amused than annoyed. "All right, let's see what you've got. Someone change the music. Give her something to work with." "Classical," Elena said. Her voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. "If you have any." Someone near the sound system fumbled with a phone. After a moment, the driving pop music cut off, replaced by something Elena recognized immediately. Tchaikovsky, from Swan Lake. The Adagio from the second act. She knew every note, every phrase, every moment where the music swelled and fell. The crowd had formed a full circle now, curious despite themselves. She could see the anticipation in their faces, the expectation that she would fail, that she would be as awkward and graceless as James, confirming their superiority. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. She felt the cool marble beneath her feet, heard the familiar music building, and let herself remember. Not the parties, not the bills, not the endless double shifts or the ache in her feet from standing all day. She remembered the studio on 14th Street where she'd trained from age 6 to 18. Remembered Madame Volkov, her teacher, who'd escaped Leningrad during the Cold War and taught ballet with a fierceness that brooked no excuses. Remembered the feeling of her body as an instrument, every muscle trained to precision, every movement deliberate and meaningful. She opened her eyes and began to move.
The first position was perfect. Heels together, toes turned out, arms curved in a gentle arc. Then she rose onto releve, her body lifting, as if the marble floor were water and she was floating. She held it, perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet, despite wearing flat serving shoes, and something in the room shifted. The laughter died. Elena moved into a développé, her leg extending slowly from a bent position until it was fully extended at 90 degrees, held there with the kind of control that took years to develop. Her arms flowed through port de bras, each position exact, each transition smooth as breathing. She was dancing without point shoes, without the proper floor, without the conditioning she'd maintained religiously until 5 years ago. But her body remembered. Muscle memory ran deeper than reason. She moved across the floor in a series of chaîné turns, her head spotting perfectly to prevent dizziness, her arms creating the momentum. The music swelled and she swelled with it, her movements growing larger, more expansive. She executed a grand jeté, launching herself across the marble, her legs splitting in perfect horizontal alignment, her body suspended in the air for a heartbeat before landing silently, impossibly controlled. The guests stood frozen, drinks forgotten. Elena had become something they couldn't mock, couldn't diminish. In this moment, in her server's uniform with her hair pulled back in that severe bun, she was more elegant, more powerful, more present than any of them could ever be. She owned the space, commanded it, her movements painting the air with precision and grace. She could feel tears threatening but refused to let them fall. This wasn't sadness. This was everything she'd lost, everything she'd given up, everything she'd pretended didn't matter flooding back through her body. This was 11 years of silence, breaking open. The music built toward its crescendo. Elena spotted the piano in the corner and made a decision. She ran toward it, building momentum, then launched into an arabesque penché, her standing leg perfectly straight, her extended leg lifted behind her until her body formed a perfect T shape. She held it, her arms extended like wings, her back arched, her face toward the frescoed ceiling. When the final note faded, she held the position for 3 seconds more in perfect stillness. Then she slowly straightened, brought her feet together in first position, and sank into a deep, formal reverence. The bow that every ballet class ended with, the gesture of respect to the teacher, the pianist, the art itself. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Elena raised her eyes and looked at Victoria Ashford, then at Marcus, then let her gaze sweep across the assembled guests. She saw shock, confusion, something that might have been shame on a few faces. She saw the sharp-featured woman who'd started it all staring at her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "That," Elena said quietly, "is dancing." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her posture perfect, her head high. Behind her, the silence finally broke into scattered, uncertain applause, but she didn't turn back. She pushed through the kitchen door, past Chef Andre's startled expression, past the prep stations and the industrial refrigerators, until she reached the small staff area where her jacket and purse hung on metal hooks. James was there, sitting on a folding chair, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I just couldn't," he started, but she held up a hand. "It's not your fault," she said. She was starting to shake now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving something raw and exposed in its wake. "None of this is your fault." "What happened out there? I heard the music change." Elena sat down on another folding chair, her legs suddenly feeling like water. "I danced." "You what?" Before she could answer, the kitchen door swung open and Marcus Ashford stepped through. Chef Andres immediately straightened, ready to defend his domain, but Marcus waved him off. His expression was complex, not angry, but thoughtful, in a way that seemed unfamiliar on his face. "You," he said, pointing at Elena, "don't go anywhere." Elena didn't leave, not because Marcus Ashford commanded it, but because her legs wouldn't have carried her if she'd tried. She sat on the folding chair in the staff area, her hands trembling in her lap, while James hovered uncertainly nearby, and the sounds of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, the sharp French instructions from Chef André, continued in surreal normalcy around them. Marcus Ashford returned 7 minutes later, this time accompanied by his wife, Victoria, and 2 other guests Elena didn't recognize. One was an older man with steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a cardigan despite the formal nature of the party. The other was a younger woman, perhaps 40, with dark skin and silver streaks in her natural hair, wearing a burgundy dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and comfortable. "Elena Kovač," Marcus said, reading from her employee badge. He pronounced it correctly, Kovač, which surprised her. Most Americans butchered her surname. "How long have you worked for Premier Service Catering?" 3 years and 4 months. "And before that?" "Various service positions, restaurants mainly, some retail." "That's not what I'm asking." Marcus pulled over another folding chair, an absurd image, this millionaire in his tailored suit sitting on a metal folding chair in a service kitchen, and sat down. "I'm asking about the dancing. Where did you train?" Elena hesitated. This part of her life wasn't something she discussed. It was a door she'd closed and locked years ago because opening it hurt too much. "The Kovač Academy of Ballet in Queens, my mother's studio, and later the New York School of Classical Ballet." The woman in the burgundy dress drew in a sharp breath. "Madame Volkov's school?" Elena nodded. "Jesus Christ," she said softly. "I'm Denise Chambers. I danced with the Alvin Ailey Company. Madame Volkov came to see us perform once, and she told our artistic director that only 3 of us had proper technique, and the rest should go back to jazz classes." She laughed, but it wasn't quite bitter.
Madame Volkov didn't believe in false encouragement, Elena said. A memory surfaced unbidden, her teacher's heavily accented voice echoing through the studio. "You think I lied to you to make you feel happy? Happy doesn't make you better. Truth makes you better." "How did someone with Volkov training end up serving canapes at a party in Westchester?" Victoria asked. Her tone had shifted from the imperious dismissal of earlier. She sounded genuinely curious, perhaps even concerned. Elena met her eyes. "My mother got sick. Stage 4 breast cancer. She was diagnosed 3 weeks after I received my acceptance letter to the American Ballet Theater's apprentice program." She delivered the information flatly, without inflection. She'd learned that was the only way to say it without breaking. Someone had to run the studio, pay the medical bills, and eventually pay for her funeral. That someone was me. The silence that followed was different from the one after her dance. This one was heavy with recognition, with the uncomfortable knowledge that life could be arbitrary and cruel, that talent and training meant nothing in the face of medical disaster and American healthcare costs. The older man in the cardigan finally spoke. "I'm Robert Friedman. I run the Friedman Foundation for the Arts." He studied her with an intensity that made Elena want to look away. "What happened to the studio?" "I kept it running for 3 years after my mother died," Elena said. But it was her vision, her relationships with the families, her reputation that made it work. Without her, enrollment dropped. Parents pulled their children. I tried to maintain her standards, but she trailed off. There was no way to explain the exhaustion of teaching 8 classes a day while working evening shifts at a restaurant to cover the studio's rent. No way to explain how it felt to watch something your mother built dissolve like sugar in water. I sold the space 5 years ago, paid off the remaining debts, moved into a smaller apartment, started working full-time in service. "And you just stopped dancing? Completely?
And Denise asked. I practice sometimes, in my apartment. Elena felt the absurdity of it even as she spoke. There is about 6 feet of floor space between my bed and my kitchenette. I can do bar work using the back of my desk chair. For God's sake, Victoria said, and there was something in her voice Elena couldn't quite identify. Not pity, sharper than that, more uncomfortable. Why didn't you try to get back into it? There are companies, scholarships. I'm 31 years old, Elena interrupted. Ballet companies don't hire 31-year-olds who haven't performed professionally, who haven't kept up intensive training, who spent the last 5 years working 12-hour shifts in restaurants and catering companies. By the time I had the financial stability to even consider it, I was already too old. That's not entirely true, Robert Friedman said carefully. There are smaller companies, contemporary companies that value mature dancers. I'm a classical ballet dancer, Elena said, and for the first time there was heat in her voice. Madame Volkov trained me in the Vaganova method. I've spent thousands of hours perfecting technique that contemporary companies don't value, and I'm not interested in starting over at the bottom of some regional company's core, assuming any would even audition me. She stopped, surprised by her own vehemence. I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. No, that was honest, Marcus said. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly under his weight. I'm going to be honest, too. What I saw out there, what you did in the middle of my ballroom in your work uniform, was more compelling than anything I've seen at Lincoln Center in the past 5 years, and I've seen everything. I donate enough to have my name on a goddamn seat. Elena wasn't sure how to respond to that. She'd grown accustomed to her dancing being something private, almost shameful, like a secret vice. Having it acknowledged, praised by people who existed in the world she'd been forced to leave behind, was disorienting. I have a proposal, Marcus continued, but before I make it, I need to know, do you still want to dance? Professionally, I mean, not just in 6 feet of floor space between a bed and a kitchenette. The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Want. Such a small word for such an enormous question. Did she want to dance? Or had she spent so many years not wanting, not allowing herself to want, that she'd forgotten how to? I don't know, she said finally, and it was the truth. I don't know if I even can anymore. What you saw out there, that was adrenaline and anger and 11 years of everything I've kept locked inside. I don't know if I could do that on command, on a schedule, night after night. But if you could, would you want to?
Elena closed her eyes. She thought about this morning, which already felt like it had happened in another lifetime. She'd woken at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of her neighbor's television bleeding through the thin apartment walls. She'd made instant coffee because the coffee maker had broken last month and she hadn't replaced it. She'd dressed in layers because her apartment's heating was unpredictable, then taken 2 buses to the catering company's warehouse in Hunts Point to collect her uniform and assignment for the day. On the second bus, a little girl had been watching dance videos on her mother's phone, the volume turned low but not low enough. Elena had caught glimpses of fouettes and pas de deux, and she'd had to look away, had to focus on the graffiti-tagged buildings sliding past the window because the alternative was breaking down on public transportation. She thought about James, crying in this very room less than an hour ago because he'd been humiliated for the entertainment of people who would forget him by tomorrow. She thought about Chef André, who ruled his kitchen with military precision but went home to a studio apartment in the Bronx not much different from hers. She thought about all the people who served people like Marcus Ashford, who moved invisibly through spaces of wealth and power, who were noticed only when they made mistakes. Yes, she said, opening her eyes. If I could, I would want to. I never stopped wanting to. Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something. Then here's what I'm proposing. The Friedman Foundation, he gestured to Robert, in partnership with the Ashford Family Trust, is launching a new initiative. We're calling it the Second Chance Arts Program. The goal is to fund artists who've been forced out of their disciplines by circumstance, medical debt, family obligations, economic necessity, and give them the resources to return. We've been planning this for 6 months, Robert added. We were going to announce it at the gala next month, but after what Marcus described seeing, and after talking to you, I think you'd be the perfect inaugural recipient. Elena stared at them. I don't understand. What exactly are you offering? Full funding for you to return to intensive training, Robert said. We'll cover living expenses so you don't need to work. We'll connect you with teachers, coaches, choreographers. We'll document your progress. And at the end of 1 year, we'll showcase you and the other recipients at a performance that will be attended by every major company and artistic director in New York. It's not charity, Marcus said quickly, perhaps seeing the pride and suspicion warring in Elena's expression. It's an investment in art, and it's... He paused, looking uncomfortable for the first time since entering the kitchen. It's an acknowledgement that what happened today, what my guests did to your colleague and what they almost did to you was unconscionable. I can't undo that, but I can do this. Elena's mind was racing, trying to find the catch, the hidden clause, the point where this fairy tale offer would reveal itself to be another kind of humiliation. Why me? She asked. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm actually any good. That performance you saw, I could have been having one miraculous moment. For all you know, I'm a mediocre dancer who just had the element of surprise. That's not what I saw, Denise said quietly. And that's not what my gut tells me. I've been around dancers my entire life, Elena. I know the difference between technical proficiency and artistry. You have both. But if you're concerned, the program includes an evaluation period. You'd be assessed by professionals. If the consensus is that returning to performance isn't viable, we'll help you transition into teaching, choreography, or arts administration instead. We're not setting you up for failure. Victoria Ashford had been quiet through this exchange, but now she spoke. I need to say something. She looked directly at Elena. What happened today? The way my guests treated you, treated your colleague, I didn't stop it. I laughed along. I participated in cruelty because it was easy. Because it was entertaining, because your dignity wasn't something I thought about. She swallowed hard. I can't take that back. I can only say that seeing you dance, hearing your story, it's forced me to recognize something I've been avoiding. I want to be part of this program not just financially, but actively. I want to learn from it. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She had expected many things from this conversation, being fired, being escorted out, being forgotten, but not a direct apology from Victoria Ashford, not this offer that seemed too generous to be real. I need time, she said finally. I can't process this right now. I need to think. Of course, Robert said. He pulled a business card from his cardigan pocket. Take all the time you need. But Elena, I hope you'll seriously consider this. Artists like you, who've maintained their dedication despite everything, you're exactly who the arts need. They left then, filing out of the staff area and back into the main event. Through the kitchen doors, Elena could hear the party resuming, the laughter and conversation picking up where it had left off. For the guests, this had been a momentary disruption, a curious incident. By tomorrow, most of them would barely remember it. But for Elena, the world had tilted on its axis.
Holy shit, James said, his voice awed. He'd been silent throughout the entire exchange, pressed into a corner, witnessing. Holy shit, Elena! Did that actually just happen? Elena looked down at the business card in her hands. Robert Friedman's name was embossed in simple black letters, along with a phone number and email address. She traced her finger over the letters, half expecting them to disappear like a mirage. I think so. I think it did. Chef André appeared in the doorway, his expression stern. You two, he said, are either fired or famous. I can't tell which. But either way, the party still needs servers. So if you're staying, get back to work. Elena stood. Her legs felt steadier now, though her heart was still racing. She looked at James. Are you okay? He nodded. Better now, especially after watching you destroy them. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. It wasn't about destroying them, Elena said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. It was about, I don't know, remembering something I'd forgotten. She picked up her serving tray, adjusted her uniform, and pushed back through the kitchen door into the ballroom. The party continued around her, but something had shifted. Guests who'd looked through her minutes ago now watched her move through the room. Some with curiosity, some with what might have been respect, some with the complicated expressions of people who'd witnessed their own cruelty reflected back at them. Elena served champagne. She collected empty glasses. She did her job with the same precision she'd always brought it to it. But inside, in a place she thought had gone dark years ago, something was flickering back to life. Elena didn't call Robert Friedman the next day or the day after that. The business cards sat on her tiny kitchen counter, propped against an empty coffee mug, while she went about her life with a strange sense of disconnection, as if she were walking through a dream where the normal rules had been temporarily suspended. She worked 3 more events that week: a corporate dinner in Manhattan, a wedding reception in Brooklyn, a book launch party in Soho. Each time she pulled on her uniform, each time she made herself invisible, she thought about the moment in Marcus Ashford's ballroom when she'd been anything but. She thought about the music, the muscle memory that had flooded through her body, the feeling of being completely, perfectly present in her own skin. On Thursday evening, she came home to find an envelope that had been slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive cardstock. Elena, I haven't stopped thinking about what I witnessed on Saturday. Please forgive the intrusion, but I have taken the liberty of arranging a trial lesson for you with Patricia Harmon, former principal dancer with New York City Ballet. She teaches at the Harrison Studios on West 43. Tomorrow, Friday, 2 p.m. No obligation, just a conversation if nothing else. The session is paid for. Robert Friedman. Elena sat on her bed, which was also effectively her couch, her dining chair, and her everything else, and stared at the note. Patricia Harmon. She knew the name, of course. Every ballet dancer in New York knew that name. Harmon had been legendary in the 1990s, famous for her technical precision and dramatic artistry. After retiring from performance, she'd become an even more legendary teacher, known for being ruthlessly honest and impossibly demanding. The idea of walking into a studio and dancing in front of Patricia Harmon terrified Elena more than performing in front of 1,000 people would have. But on Friday at 1:30 p.m., she found herself on the subway heading into Manhattan, wearing leggings and a t-shirt with her old dance bag slung over her shoulder. The bag smelled of old canvas and faded dreams. Inside were the point shoes she hadn't been able to throw away, a leotard that was probably too small now, and a half-empty bottle of water from whenever she'd last used it. Harrison Studios occupied the 3rd floor of a building that probably was a factory once. The studio itself was beautiful in its simplicity: high ceilings, polished wood floors, a wall of mirrors, a bar that ran the length of the room. Sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. Patricia Harmon was 63 and looked like she could still perform if she wanted to. Her posture was impeccable, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She sat on a folding chair near the piano, watching as Elena entered.
"You're late," she said. Her voice carried the crisp diction of someone who'd spent decades projecting across theaters. Elena checked her phone. It was 1:58 p.m. The lesson doesn't start until 2. Professional dancers arrive 15 minutes early, but you're not a professional dancer, are you? You're a waitress who used to dance. Patricia's expression didn't change. Robert Friedman asked me to assess you. He seems to think you're worth investing in. Let's find out if he's delusional or insightful. Elena set down her bag with more force than necessary. She'd dealt with Madame Volkov for 12 years. She could handle Patricia Harmon for one afternoon. "I need to warm up," she said. "No, you don't. You need to show me what you can do right now, cold, unprepared. That's what performance is. You don't always get ideal conditions." She gestured toward the center of the studio. "Show me your technique. Start with a basic bar combination. I'll call it out." Elena took her position at the bar, her hand resting lightly on the worn wood. Her heart was hammering, but she forced her breathing to steady. This was a language she'd spoken fluently once. She just had to remember the words. Pliés, Patricia commanded. 2 demi, 2 grand in each position. First, second, fourth, fifth. Port de bras on the grand pliés. Elena began. The first demi-plié in first position sent a shock of pain through her ankles. They were tight, unprepared, years of neglect making themselves known. She breathed through it, sinking into the grand plié, her arms floating up through second position to fifth above her head. The movement felt rusty, like a door on old hinges. "Your turnout is gone," Patricia observed clinically. "Your heels are rolling in on the grand plié in second, and you're gripping the bar like it's a life preserver." Elena said nothing, just continued through the combination. Second position, the wide stance making her inner thighs scream. Fourth position, where the rotation should have been easy but felt foreign. Fifth position, where her feet barely crossed because her hips had lost their flexibility. Tendues, Patricia continued, merciless. 16 to the front, side, back, other side. The tendues were marginally better. The brushing motion of the foot along the floor, extending until only the toe touched the ground, then pulling back. This was so ingrained in muscle memory that her body could almost do it without thought. Almost. But her supporting leg wavered, her standing ankle rolling slightly with each extension. They continued through a full barré, tendues, dégagés, rond de jambe, frappés, fondus, développés, grand battements. Each combination exposed another weakness, another place where time and necessity had eroded what had once been iron-strong technique. By the time Patricia called the final combination, Elena's legs were shaking and sweat was running down her spine. "Center floor," Patricia said. She'd moved to stand directly in front of the mirror, her posture a silent rebuke to Elena's fatigue. Adagio, développé front, hold. Promenade, développé side, hold. Arabesque penché, finish with a pirouette. Elena moved to the center of the studio. Without the bar for support, every weakness was magnified. She lifted her working leg in développé, knee bending, then slowly extending until her leg was at 90 degrees in front of her. It trembled visibly. The promenade, a full turn while maintaining the position, was a disaster. She made it halfway before her supporting leg buckled slightly, forcing her to drop the gesture leg to save herself. "Again," Patricia said. Elena tried again, and again, and again. On the fourth attempt, she made it through the entire combination without a major error, but it was ugly, forced, effortful, lacking any of the effortless grace that ballet demanded. "Pirouettes," Patricia said. "Doubles on flat, then on relevé, then on point if those shoes in your bag still fit." The doubles were rough. Elena could get through them, but her spot was imprecise, her supporting leg wobbly, her landing heavy. On relevé, on the ball of the foot, they were worse. She pitched forward on the second rotation, had to catch herself with a step. "I can't do point," Elena said. The admission felt like defeat. "I haven't been on point in 5 years. I'd break my ankles." Patricia finally showed something other than clinical assessment, a slight raising of one eyebrow. "Then why did you bring the shoes?"
"I don't know." Elena looked down at her feet, at the floor. "Hope, maybe. Stupidity." "Sit down," Patricia commanded, gesturing to the floor. Elena sank down gratefully, her legs folding under her. Patricia remained standing, looking down at her like a judge delivering a verdict. "Your technique is degraded," Patricia said flatly. "Your turnout is gone, your balance is compromised, your strength is diminished, and your extensions are limited. You move like someone who learned ballet once but hasn't practiced seriously in years.
She paused. Which is exactly what you are. Elena felt something inside her crumbling. She'd known it would be bad. She'd known she wasn't the dancer she'd once been. But hearing it stated so baldly, so factually, brought home the enormity of what she'd lost. However, Patricia continued, and Elena's head snapped up, you have something most dancers never develop. You have artistry. Even in those disaster pirouettes, even with your trembling legs and compromised technique, you moved with intention, with meaning. You weren't just executing steps, you were saying something. Elena didn't trust herself to speak. Patricia crossed the studio and sat down on the floor facing her, a gesture so unexpected that Elena almost laughed. Here was this legend of American ballet sitting cross-legged on a studio floor like a student. Robert told me your story, your mother, the medical bills, the studio, all of it. And then he told me what you did at the Ashford party, how you danced in your work uniform in front of people who'd been mocking your colleague. Do you know what impressed him most? Elena shook her head. That you waited, Patricia said. You didn't jump up immediately to defend yourself or show off. You watched them humiliate someone else. You absorbed their cruelty, and then you made a choice. That's not impulse. That's artistry informed by humanity. She leaned forward slightly. Technical skill can be rebuilt. Strength can be regained, but artistry, real artistry, that's something you either have or you don't, and you have it. But you said my technique is degraded. I said it's degraded, not destroyed. There's a difference. Patricia's voice was firm. If you're willing to work, and I mean work harder than you've ever worked in your life, I can get you back to performance level. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, and there's no guarantee you'll reach the level you might have achieved if life hadn't interrupted. But you can dance again. Professionally, if you want it badly enough. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd cried more in the past week than she had in the previous 5 years combined. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that kind of work. Not anymore. You carried your mother's dream on your back while she died. You kept a studio running while working night shifts. You held yourself together through medical bankruptcy. Don't tell me you're not strong enough. She stood, extending a hand. The question isn't whether you're strong enough. The question is whether you're willing to let yourself want this. Elena took Patricia's hand and let herself be pulled to her feet. Her legs were still shaking from the bar work, her muscles already protesting what she'd put them through. Tomorrow she would be in agony. But beneath the pain, beneath the fatigue, she felt something else, a spark of the hunger she'd spent years suppressing. If I did this, Elena said carefully, if I accepted the Foundation's offer, would you teach me? Patricia smiled, and it transformed her severe face into something warm. I wouldn't have agreed to this assessment if I wasn't prepared to take you on. But understand, I don't teach because I need the money. I teach because I believe in protecting the art form. If you come to me, you come ready to be broken down and rebuilt. You come ready to work through pain, through doubt, through every moment when you want to quit. And you come ready to trust me when I tell you you're capable of more than you think you are. I understand, Elena said. Then go home, rest, eat something substantial, your tooth-turn, and call Robert Friedman. Tell him you're in. Patricia walked to her bag and pulled out her phone. I'm going to call him too. We'll need to set up a proper schedule, bring in a physical therapist to assess any old injuries, get you to a nutritionist. This isn't just about dancing. This is about treating your body like the instrument it is. Elena gathered her things in a daze. At the studio doors, she turned back. Patricia, why are you doing this? The Foundation is paying you, but you could work with anyone. Why me? Patricia was quiet for a moment.
looking out the tall windows at the city beyond. Because I was you once. Different circumstances, but the same core situation. Talent interrupted by life. I was lucky. I had people who believed in me, who gave me a second chance. Not everyone gets that. And because that performance Robert described, dancing in your work uniform for people who saw you as invisible, that took courage. Ballet needs courage right now. It needs dancers who understand what it means to fight for every moment on stage.
Elena left the studio and walked through Manhattan in the afternoon sunlight. She felt scraped raw, exposed, as if Patricia's assessment had peeled away years of protective numbness. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from James. "How'd it go? Are you the next Misty Copeland or what?" Elena smiled despite herself. She texted back, "More like the next person who can't walk tomorrow, but it went well, I think." Another buzz, this time from an unknown number. "Elena, this is Denise Chambers. Victoria Ashford gave me your number. Hope that's okay. Would love to buy you coffee sometime. Want to hear more about your training. Also, might have some opportunities for you to teach if you're interested. No pressure." And then, almost immediately, another message, this one from Premier Service Catering. "Elena, Marcus Ashford has requested you specifically for an event next Saturday at his Manhattan residence. Premium rate, half the usual hours. Let me know if you're available. Management." Elena stopped walking and leaned against a building, suddenly overwhelmed. A week ago she'd been invisible. Now people were seeking her out, seeing her, offering her opportunities. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. She pulled up Robert Friedman's contact information, stared at it for 30 seconds, then pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring. "Elena, I was hoping you'd call." "I just left the studio," she said. "Patricia says she'll work with me. She says I have artistry, but my technique is degraded, which somehow translated into the most hopeful conversation I've had in years." Robert laughed. "That sounds like Patricia. She doesn't sugarcoat, but when she commits to a student, she's all in." His voice turned more serious. "Does this mean you're accepting the offer?" Elena took a deep breath. Across the street, she could see a dance studio through a second-floor window. A children's class, little girls in pink leotards attempting unison movements with varying degrees of success. She thought of her mother's studio, of all those young dancers who'd walked through the door with dreams bigger than their technical skills. She thought of herself at 8 years old, at 12, at 16, always reaching for something just beyond her grasp. "Yes," she said, "I'm in. I'm accepting." "Good." Robert's satisfaction was audible. "Then let's talk logistics. Can you come to my office Monday morning? We need to set up your stipend, connect you with the rest of the team, work out your training schedule, and Elena," he paused, "welcome back." After they hung up, Elena stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the city move around her. The afternoon was sliding toward evening, that golden hour when everything looked briefly beautiful. She thought about calling her father. They hadn't spoken in 6 months. Their relationship still fractured from arguments during her mother's illness. She thought about visiting her mother's grave, telling her the news. She thought about 1,000 things she should do, should say, should feel. Instead, she just stood there and let herself want. Let herself imagine walking into a theater in a year, performing for an audience, becoming again the thing she'd once been destined to be. It felt dangerous, that wanting. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward meant no going back. But after years of playing it safe, of making herself small and invisible, of serving people who barely acknowledged her existence, maybe dangerous was exactly what she needed. The weekend passed in a blur of logistical decisions. Elena gave her notice to Premier Service Catering, which was easier than expected since Marcus Ashford had made it clear he wanted to sponsor her training directly. She called her landlord to explain she'd be paying rent on time for the foreseeable future,
which led to a conversation where she learned 3 other tenants in the building were facing eviction. "You should take that apartments," her landlord, Mr. Petrov, said in his thick Russian accent. "Connect them. Make studio for yourself. Only 200 more a month." Elena had laughed, thinking he was joking, but then she'd looked at her first stipend check, deposited Friday evening, and realized he wasn't. She could afford it. After years of calculating every dollar, of choosing between groceries and electricity, she could actually afford to have space. By Fun Day afternoon, she'd committed to taking the apartment next to hers. Mr. Petrov had already started removing the wall between them, creating what would become a small but functional dance studio in the footprint of 2 rent-controlled apartments. "Your mother would approve," Mr. Petrov said, pausing in his demolition work. He'd known Elena since she was a teenager, had given her grace periods on rent more times than she could count. "She was always denser. You should be denser too."
Monday morning, Elena dressed in the closest thing she had to professional clothing, black pants and a gray sweater, both bought at Target 2 years ago, and took the subway to Robert Friedman's office in Midtown. The Friedman Foundation occupied a suite on the 20th floor of a building on Madison Avenue, all glass and understated elegance. Robert's office was smaller than Elena expected, lined with books and photographs of performances. He looked different here than he had in the Ashford's kitchen, more at home, less like a wealthy patron, and more like someone who genuinely loved what he did. "Coffee?" he offered, gesturing to a French press on a side table. "Please." Elena accepted the mug gratefully. She hadn't slept well, kept waking from dreams where she was back on stage but couldn't remember the choreography. "Let's start with the practical matters," Robert said, settling behind his desk. "The foundation will provide you with a monthly stipend of $4,000. That's meant to cover rent, food, basic expenses. Your training costs, Patricia's fees, studio rental, physical therapy, nutritionist consultations, are covered separately. We'll provide health insurance, and you'll have access to a small budget for dance clothes, shoes, any equipment you need." Elena felt dizzy. $4,000 a month was more than she'd need in 6 months at some of her previous jobs. That's incredibly generous. It's what you'd make in a core position at a regional company, roughly. "We're not trying to make you wealthy. We're trying to remove financial stress so you can focus entirely on training." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is the contract. Take it home, read it thoroughly. If you want a lawyer to look at it, we'll pay for that. Don't sign anything until you're completely comfortable." Elena opened the folder. The contract was surprisingly straightforward. She'd commit to 12 months of intensive training, document her progress through periodic video assessments, and perform in the Foundation's showcase at the end of the year. If she failed to meet the program's requirements through her own choice rather than injury or circumstances beyond her control, she'd need to repay a prorated portion of the funding. "What about work?" Elena asked. "The contract says I can't have outside employment, but what if I want to teach? Denise Chambers reached out about some teaching opportunities." "Teaching is fine. Encouraged, actually. We don't want you living in a bubble. Teaching helps you develop artistry, helps you understand choreography from different angles. Just nothing that compromises your training time or energy." He poured more coffee for both of them. "Speaking of Denise, she and Victoria Ashford have been developing a supplementary program. They want to create performance opportunities for you beyond just the final showcase. Smaller events, community performances, that kind of thing. Would you be interested?" "Maybe," Elena said cautiously. "I need to see where I am physically first. If Patricia is right about how degraded my technique is, it might be months before I'm ready to perform anything." "Fair enough." Robert made a note. "Now, the harder question. Are you prepared for the publicity around this? Marcus wants to document your journey. He's talking about a short documentary, articles in the arts section of the Times, social media presence. The story is compelling. Former dancer, forced out by medical debt, returns to the art form through foundation support. It's exactly the kind of narrative that brings attention to the program. Elena set down her coffee mug. I'm not sure how I feel about that. This is already going to be incredibly personal, incredibly difficult. Having cameras watching while I struggle feels invasive. I understand. And we can set boundaries. But I want you to think about something. Your story matters not just because it's yours, but because it's emblematic of a much larger problem. How many artists have we lost because of medical debt, student loans, family obligations? How many Elena Kovačes are out there serving coffee or working retail, their talents buried under financial necessity? He leaned forward. If your story can change that, can help create more programs like this one, isn't that worth some discomfort? Elena thought about James, crying in the kitchen. Thought about all the servers and caterers and retail workers she'd known over the years, the ones who'd mentioned they used to paint, used to act, used to make music before life intervened. Thought about her mother's students, the ones whose families couldn't afford to continue lessons after Elena raised the rates trying to keep the studio solvent.
Okay, she said, okay, I'll do the publicity, but I need final approval on anything that gets published or posted. No surprises. Done. Robert extended his hand across the desk. Welcome to the Second Chance Arts program, Elena. I have a feeling you're going to make us all look very good. Training began the next day. Patricia had arranged for Elena to have daily 2-hour sessions, 1 hour of intensive technique work, 1 hour of repertoire and artistry. The first week was brutal. Elena's body, unprepared for the demands she was suddenly making of it, protested violently. She woke each morning barely able to move, her muscles screaming, her joints swollen. This is normal, the physical therapist Robert had arranged told her. His name was Marcus, no relation to Ashford, and he was a slight man with steady hands and a calm demeanor. You're asking your body to remember skills it hasn't accessed in years. It's going to fight you. Our job is to make sure it fights productively without injury. He worked on her 3 times a week, manipulating her joints, massaging her muscles, teaching her exercises to rebuild the strength and flexibility she'd lost. It was painful, uncomfortable work that felt more like torture than therapy. But slowly, incrementally, things began to improve. By the end of the second week, Elena could execute a full bar without wanting to cry. By the end of the third week, her pirouettes on flat were clean, controlled. By week 4, Patricia introduced point work. Just bar for now, Patricia said, watching as Elena laced up the shoes that fit slightly looser than they once had. We need to rebuild your foot strength before you try anything in the center. Standing on point for the first time in 5 years felt like coming home and being a stranger simultaneously. Elena's feet remembered the position, the way her weight should distribute across the box of the shoe, the engagement of her ankles and calves and thighs. But her feet also screamed in protest, unused to bearing her full weight on such a small surface area. Relevés, Patricia commanded. 16. Focus on placement, not speed. Elena rose and lowered, her hand light on the bar for balance. Each relevé was a small victory and a sharp reminder of how far she had to go. Better, Patricia said, which was high praise coming from her. Again, other side. The weeks blurred together into a routine of pain and incremental progress. Elena woke at 7, had coffee and the high-protein breakfast the nutritionist had prescribed, then took the subway to Patricia's studio for her 9 a.m. session. After training, she'd see Marcus, the physical therapist, if it was one of her scheduled days, or she'd go home to practice on her own in the slowly developing studio space of her now connected apartments. Mr. Petrov had finished removing the wall and refinishing the floor by week 3. Elena had installed a proper bar and a large mirror salvaged from a dance studio that was closing in Brooklyn. The space wasn't big, maybe 15 by 20 feet, but it was hers. She could practice without worrying about neighbors below her, could play music as loud as she wanted, could work through choreography without folding herself into impossible contortions to fit the space. In the evenings, she taught. Denise had connected her with a community center in Queens that needed a ballet instructor for their youth program. The pay wasn't much, but Elena found she loved it, working with kids who were eager and unpolished, who hadn't yet learned to be self-conscious about their bodies or their dreams. One of her students was a girl named Maya, 9 years old, with dark curls and a fierce determination that reminded Elena of herself at that age. Maya's family had emigrated from Mexico 3 years ago, and her mother worked 2 jobs to afford the subsidized dance classes. "Miss Elena," Maya asked one evening after class, while Elena was helping her adjust her turnout, "did you always know you wanted to be a dancer?" Elena thought about it. "I think I always knew I needed to be a dancer," she said carefully. "There's a difference between wanting something and needing it. Wanting is a choice. Needing is part of who you are." Maya considered this seriously. "I think I need to dance," she said. "Then you will. No matter what obstacles come, if you need it badly enough, you'll find a way." She hoped she was right. She hoped she was finding a way herself. 2 months into training, Robert asked Elena to meet him at a television studio in Chelsea. "There's someone who wants to interview you for a segment on artists and economic barriers. You don't have to do it, but I think you should consider it." The someone turned out to be Maria Santos, host of a nationally syndicated morning show called Real Talk. Maria had watched the show occasionally. It was one of those programs that mixed celebrity interviews with serious social issues, trying to be both entertaining and meaningful.
Maria was warmer in person than she appeared on screen, with an easy laugh and genuine curiosity. They sat in the small studio, just the 2 of them, and a handful of crew members, and talked for over an hour. "Tell me about the night at the Ashford party," Maria said. "That moment when you decided to dance. What were you thinking?" Elena had told this story several times now for the Foundation's documentation, but something about Maria's direct gaze made her want to be more honest. "I was thinking about how much I hated them," she said, "and how much I hated myself for needing their money, their approval, their consideration. I was thinking that I'd spent 3 years being invisible to people like them, and I was tired of it." "So it was anger?" "It was anger, yes, but it was also—" Elena searched for the right words. "It was reclamation. I'd given up so much of myself to survive. That dance was me saying, this is who I am. This is who I was always supposed to be. You can ignore it, but that doesn't make it less true." Maria nodded slowly. "And now, 2 months into this program, are you still that angry?" "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "I'm angry that it took a performance at a millionaire's party to get this opportunity. I'm angry that there aren't more programs like this, that I'm lucky and most people in my situation aren't. I'm angry that my mother died thinking she'd failed me, when really the system failed both of us." "But you're channeling that anger productively." "I'm trying to. Patricia, my teacher, says that real artistry comes from transforming pain into something beautiful. Not erasing the pain, but acknowledging it and making it meaningful." Elena smiled slightly. "I'm not sure I'm there yet. Most days I'm just trying not to fall over during pirouettes." The interview aired 2 weeks later. Elena watched it in her apartment-turned-studio with James, who'd become a regular visitor, usually bringing takeout and commentary. "You look good on camera," he said, as they watched Elena on screen discuss the financial barriers facing artists. Serious, but not bitter. Honest without being performative. "I don't know if I said the right things," Elena worried. "You said true things. That's better than right things." The response to the interview was immediate and overwhelming. Elena's social media presence, which had been non-existent, suddenly exploded. The Foundation set up an official account for her, and within days, she had thousands of followers. Messages poured in from other artists who'd been forced to abandon their crafts, from young dancers seeking advice, from people who simply wanted to say her story had moved them. But not all the messages were supportive. Some accused her of being a charity case, of taking opportunities away from younger dancers. Others suggested she was too old, too far gone, that she should accept her limitations rather than grasping at impossible dreams. And some were simply cruel, picking apart her appearance, her background, her decision to speak publicly about financial struggles. "Ignore them," Denise advised when she showed her some of the particularly harsh messages. They were having coffee at a cafe near Patricia's studio, a weekly ritual they'd developed. Anyone who's ever put themselves out there artistically has dealt with this. The only way to win is to do the work so well that the critics become irrelevant. How do you ignore it? It feels like acid. You don't ignore it completely. You acknowledge that it hurts, and then you decide whether the criticism is useful. Most of it isn't. It's just people projecting their own fears and insecurities onto you. Denise stirred her coffee thoughtfully. When I was coming up through Ailey, I got so much criticism. I was too dark, too curvy, too technical, too emotional, too everything. And every criticism felt like proof that I didn't belong. But then I realized something. The people criticizing me weren't in the studio. They weren't doing the work. They were spectators, and I was the performer. Their opinion mattered only as much as I let it matter. Elena tried to take this wisdom to heart, but it was difficult. Every harsh comment felt like confirmation of the voices in her own head that said she was foolish to try, too old to succeed, too broken to be fixed. 3 months in, Patricia noticed her distraction during a technique session. "Where are you?" she asked sharply, after Elena bobbled a simple double pirouette. "You're here physically, but your mind is somewhere else." "I'm sorry. I'll focus." "Stop." Patricia walked to the center of the studio, positioned herself directly in front of Elena. "What's going on?" Elena hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than evasion. "The public attention is harder than I expected. The criticism, the expectations, the people watching my progress like it's a reality show. I feel like I'm performing all the time, even when I'm just trying to train." "Then stop performing," Patricia said simply. "This studio is sacred space. When you're here, you're not Elena the media story or Elena the charity case. You're just a dancer working on her craft. The rest is noise." "I don't know how to tune it out." Patricia sighed, a sound of exasperation mixed with understanding. "Do you know why I left NYCB at the height of my career?" Elena shook her head. She knew Patricia had retired early, 38, which was young for a principal dancer with her technique, but the reasons had always been vague. "Because I forgot why I danced," Patricia said. "I got so caught up in the reviews, the politics, the pressure to be perfect every single night that I lost touch with the thing that made me fall in love with ballet in the first place. And once that was gone, there was no point in continuing." She looked at Elena intently. "You have a choice right now. You can dance for the critics, for the foundation, for the people following your Instagram account. Or you can dance for yourself, for the art, for the same reason you danced in that ballroom when no one was asking you to. Only one of those will sustain you." Elena felt the truth of this settle into her bones. "I don't want to lose why I dance." "Then don't," Patricia said. "Eyes front. Let's take it from the top." They worked through the rest of the session with a different quality. Elena pushing aside the noise, focusing solely on the movement, the music, the conversation between her body and the space. It wasn't perfect. She still made mistakes, still had moments of doubt. But underneath it all was the pure, simple love of moving to music, of expressing something wordless through her body. By the time she left the studio that evening, exhausted and aching, but somehow lighter, Elena understood what Patricia had been trying to teach her. The public narrative was something she'd have to manage, but it wasn't her truth. Her truth was in the studio, in the daily work, in the slow rebuilding of something she thought was lost forever. Everything else was just noise. 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at the Joyce Theater,
her heart hammering against her ribs. The showcase performance was minutes away. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience settling. Critics, artistic directors, dancers, and, in the front row, James, Denise, Victoria, and Robert. Patricia appeared beside her. Ready? Elena thought about everything that had brought her here. Her mother's death, years of invisibility, that moment in the Ashford ballroom, the brutal months of rebuilding. She thought about Maya and her other students, watching from the audience, seeing what was possible. "Yes," she said. The music began, not Tchaikovsky this time, but something contemporary, something that told her story without words. Elena walked onto that stage and danced. Not perfectly, not without evidence of the years lost, but with everything she'd learned about survival, about dignity, about refusing to disappear.